we can look statistically back in the 1970s, early 1980s, when I went into practice, the average life expectancy for a medium-sized dog, golden retriever, we'll use them, was 17 years. That life expectancy now is 10. And we accept that as normal and expected. It's not normal. And I want to roll back 50 years and get our pets living to that level again. And in order to do that, we are going to have to feed higher quality ingredient foods. People who follow me know that I've written cookbooks for dogs, that I am a huge proponent of raw feeding. I'm a huge proponent of gently cooked foods. And what I'm really a proponent of is human grade ingredients. We shouldn't have to say, do you feed your dog real food?
Get to the bottom of what an optimal diet is. You need to understand lots of different things about the dog. What does he eat in the wild? Diet studies of the dog, the biology of the dog. What does his gut look like? If you never saw him eating a meal before and you looked at this dog and his jaw and his teeth and his throat and his gut, what does it look like this animal eats? And even like evolution, where did he come from? What are his cousins and brothers doing, and that kind of thing. So, and how far removed is he from all that? When you add up all those three things, evolution, diet studies, and gut morphology, to not ruin everything from the very offset, you'd say that this animal is absolutely a meat eater. A very large part of his diet would be meat and bone, and there's no getting away from that. But there's a little kind of few differences that we can get into later on. But an optimal diet would be a fresh, biologically appropriate diet, the same as every other animal on the planet. Everybody needs fresh food for so many reasons, but so does your cat and dog for sure.
And every single person, when they first start feeding raw, is terrified. Okay, admit it. It's fine. Everybody is, and by using your local vet, your local raw store, your Facebook forums, your friends, you will get through that initial nervousness, and you'll never look back. You'll absolutely love it. Everybody feels scared. Everybody feels a bit overwhelmed. Okay, and when they look back, they go, "Oh, why didn't I?" So often I hear, "Why didn't I do this 5 years ago? Why didn't I do it 20 years ago?"
But when you look at the dog to see, are you a meat eater still? Absolutely. He's got this hinged jaw that only snaps closed. Like there's no sideways movement as I'm moving my jaw here, as omnivores have for grinding plant forage. Theirs just snaps open and closed. It's why he holds his teddy and he shakes it as hard as he can, because he's no sideways movement. He's trying to tear a chunk off to swallow. So he's got forward-facing eyes, carnivorous taste buds. Look at the teeth. I mean, that's not for chewing peaches. That is a serious set of gnashers. He's got an extra wide keratinized gullet for swallowing large lumps. And he's got special teeth that side past each other for chopping meat. Everything is meat eater up the front. And then when you go inside the dog and have a look, he's got a very smooth, fast, short digestive tract, highly acidic. No kind of dead ends and stuff for slowing down the passage of digestive, which omnivores would have, and herbivores would have huge digestive systems, many, many times the length of their body. Is to give the bacteria their time to ferment all this stuff. Dogs don't have any of that. It just shoots right through. And a number of other kind of quirks about the dog make it quite carnivorous on the inside. All the biologists would say, any physiologist and biologist would call this a very, very much a carnivorous dog.
We shouldn't have to say, do you feed your dog human food? There's no such thing as, well, there is actually human food, but pet food is actually pet feed because it's regulated as livestock feed. And what can go into livestock feed is very different from food that we feed ourselves and that we should be feeding our pets. So really we have to start with, let's look at ingredients and let's find things that really are real food, not something that's highly processed, something that's been manipulated, cooked at high heat 5 times, has poor quality ingredients, poisonous ingredients for our pets, because that's what we find in these processed foods. So for me, in order to have best nutrition for our dogs, we need to be looking at feeding high quality ingredients, real food.
The next thing they'll say, after they say, well, there's no evidence of benefits, they'll say, well, you're going to give your dog salmonella or E. coli or listeria. And again, absolutely no evidence that will happen. Yes, there are lots of papers saying that there is these bugs and more within raw food. Of course there is, because it's real food. It hasn't been sterilized, denatured, devitalized. This is a paper, you can look it up. It's a 2019 paper, and they look at papers over the last 50 years for evidence of harm to dogs, and they do cite a number of papers, but they don't cite any more than one or two where a pet may have been injured, or an owner may have been injured, at most. And you have to read between the lines. So when you look at the catalogue of disasters that is happening every year, every day with kibble, compared with the, smattering, vanishingly low incidence of problems in the last 50 years from raw food, there is absolutely no comparison.
But our dogs do not have a need for grains in their diet. What they do have a need for is meat. Meat supplies what they need for good heart function.
But there is a couple of crucial things going on in the dog that are now brought up by certain sources to point towards the fact that they have taken some steps towards plant digestion, which is really interesting. The most important one is the fact that the dog, when you look at his pancreas, has replicated out a gene called AME2B, and that is for producing an enzyme for digesting carbohydrates. And he has more genes of that than true carnivores, like anything, cats, true wolves, trout, dolphins, owls, whatever. And so they have expanded out this gene a little bit, not a huge amount. Like in a body that's doing thousands of carnivorous processes, this is a suggestion of a step towards evolution towards carbohydrates. So now we know that dogs that evolve beside farmers that eat a lot of cereal crops and stuff, those breeds have replicated out that gene a bit, whereas likes of huskies and Akita that lived beside societies that didn't really rear crops didn't expand out the gene much, and dingoes didn't either. So it's just an interesting thing that Darwin would kill to understand today, but that's now used as well. Look, they can digest carbohydrates a tiny bit better than cats. They can. And they have a couple of other quirks, a couple of other physiological quirks that make them better at carbohydrates than cats, twice as good. But as Doug Newman said to Gene Dodds, like just because we can digest sucrose and ethanol doesn't mean half my diet should be rum and cookies. I mean, it's so obvious. You can't just leap on this, you can digest sugar, eat 60% sugar. I mean, it's ridiculous. And like, what was your excuse before 2014, before Axelson did this study, so what have you been explaining for the last 60 years? So things like that can be used. The occasional diet study can be used, and these little quirks in the dog can be used, but like, what's the excuse for feeding carbohydrates to cats? So that's the kind of the truth of where dogs have taken tiny steps towards this using this material, but it's not a reason to feed them high dose carbohydrates, particularly when we see they've got things like obesity crisis at the exact same time as us, at pretty much the same scale, same figures and everything. And like so many studies of like working dogs where if they're fed less carbohydrates, they do better. So dogs on zero, the sled dogs aren't fed carbohydrates. Sled dogs, the hardest working animals on the planet, which is a true test of your diet. If you're going to tell me your diet is good, let me see it in working dogs or any study like that, which just don't exist for kibble. When we do try out those studies, carbohydrates don't do well. In fact, even when you do ad lib studies, which is where you put dogs in a room with bowls of whatever they want in front of them, they don't eat carbohydrates. They eat them to about maximum 7% of their diet, and but they prefer fat and protein. That's fat, particularly at the start. They love a bit of fat because they're used to eating lean animals. Fat is a prized commodity, so they love fatty stuff because fat is just great energy for them. Because wolves and dogs, very lean animals out in the wild, they don't get a lot of fat. So they pig out on fat initially, and then it decreases to a leaner diet. But carbohydrates are just not in the menu. Those studies are done by pet food companies. Like they paid for those studies. They got the results. Does it change their formula at all? Not at all. Not a jot. So that kind of irritates me a little bit. We know they don't eat them in taste trials. We know that studies show they don't eat a lot of them. They eat rabbits and rats, and as much as we don't want to think about that, they eat they're scavenging carnivores. They'll eat anything. They're just they'll eat carcass and perhaps a little bit of plant material. But I just think we've gone along. Kibble is not really the diet that you would dream of for this animal.
But you can feed these superfoods. Why you can get a bag of freeze-dried hearts as treats instead of handing out poor quality crap treats from the grocery store. Use something like that, which is going to give him good nutrition and support his body in whatever it needs. And like I said, like treats like. So if you have a dog who has some heart disease, get some freeze-dried hearts to feed on. If he's got lung disease, get some freeze-dried lungs to feed on.
If you want to take things a little bit more gentle, or you've just got a little bit of kibble to get rid of, you can just do a quarter raw on the first day, half on the second day, 3/4 on the third day, and fully raw on the fourth day. It's a 4-day transition period. Okay.